Hello, and welcome to the third annual Ignite Political Forum. I am Joe Dees, social studies teacher in the engineering college at Ignite, and with us today is Republican candidate in the 69th House District of Kentucky, Mr. Steve Doan. Mr. Doan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Dees. My name is Steve Doan. I grew up here in northern Kentucky, specifically Erlanger. After attending Lloyd High School, where I graduated in 2005, I went to Northern Kentucky University, where I double majored in economics and business administration. After that, I attended Salmon P. Chase College of Law, where I graduated in 2012. I began my career representing police officers in civil rights cases. And after that, I accepted a job in Governor Matt Bevin's administration, where I served as the general counsel for the Governor's Office of Agricultural Policy. I currently practice here in Erlanger as an attorney, where I focus mainly on real estate law and family law, and then general civil litigation. So looking forward to talking with you all today, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Do you consider yourself a good person, and why?
That's a philosophical question. I do consider myself a good person. It's a difficult thing, I think, you've got morals and you've got ethics. Ethics is what's right in this situation, and morals is what's right always. And so I try to present myself on a moral basis, where I've got a good compass, a baseline of what human rights are, what a human deserves, and how they deserve to be treated. And I always try to act in that regardless of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Owen Bryant, and I would like, over the summer, the Supreme Court came out and said that they need to rethink about LGBTQIA community rights. So what is your plan to protect people within the community?
Sure. So I think that's an interesting topic. Some on one side see that as the new civil rights movement. Some people on the other side don't see it that way. I think that on one side there is, I think there's a confusion in terms a little bit. I think that one of those confusions, I don't think we talk about temperament enough. So how is someone genetically born? How do those genetic traits express themselves in their life? And it's important, I think, to further talk about temperament. So sometimes you might have a biological male who expresses himself or herself in, a biological male who expresses themselves in more feminine traits. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that government needs to be getting involved in what people do in their own homes and the privacy of their own homes. But it's certainly an area that we're going to see going forward, and have a national and a local conversation on those issues. People deserve to do whatever they want for the most part without government interference, so long as they're not harming another individual. And so as long as that's the baseline, that's my moral baseline there, and as long as we're working within that framework, I don't really have a problem per se with how people want to call themselves or how they want to act.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Connor Pietrowski, and what will you do to improve our schools?
So I think I ran on 3 issues. I ran on infrastructure, I ran on public protection, and I ran on education. And education is an important one. When I graduated from Lloyd High School in 2005, we were a top 10 school in the state. It was something I was really proud of when I went there, and something that set me up for a good future. I had great teachers. I'd been in that school district my entire life. You knew everybody, and it felt like family almost in some respects. I think we've lost a part of that in our community. I think that improving education has more to do than just funding for schools. Now, we do have a lot of unfunded mandates that hurt our schools, and we need to address those down in Frankfort. But ultimately, it's improving the condition of the families in the community. No offense to what I'll refer to as transient individuals, right? People that move in and out of school districts, and maybe they can't settle good ground in the community. I want to advance policies that help people get grounded in their community so that they can invest in their children, invest in their local communities, their schools. And I think that once we shift ourselves towards thinking that way, and not just thinking that if we dump a bunch of money into a system, it's going to fix it, that we'll start to improve education. We need to make sure that our young people are being held to a high standard, and that they're being pushed towards a high standard. We did that in high school when I went there, when I went to Lloyd, and I think sometimes we've gotten away from that. So that's what I'd like to see.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, my name is Kevin Morales. My question for you is, what is something you want to change about government?
Government doesn't work. So, all the time. It does in some respects. I kind of mentioned the three things that I ran on. I think those are the three things that government should do. Right? We should build roads. We should fund public education to make sure that students are learning, well and achieving well, and public protection. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we get back to the basics of government and that we focus on those specific issues. And once we get those things right, then I think we can get out into other areas. But I want to just make sure that everything is working. And if you've paid attention, and I'm sure you have over the last 2 years, you've noticed that government isn't always working. And one of the tough positions from being in, having served on city council, having worked for Governor Bevin, you learned that there's no perfect solutions. There's only trade-offs. And so when you craft a policy, there are people on the margins who are going to make it and who aren't going to make it. And so those are the ones you have to be concerned with. So that's something that I'm interested in going down to Frankfurt and doing, watching everybody and making sure that when we craft policies, we're getting the maximum for the trade-offs that we make.
Thank you.
My name is Eva Robinson, and my question is, what will you do to make life-saving medications such as insulin more affordable?
This one came through. They gave me the topics ahead of time. There's not a lot that we can do at a state level. And I'm going to give you kind of a constitutional education on why we can't. So there's two clauses in the federal Constitution. There's the supremacy clause, which basically says if the federal government weighs in on it, they're the ones in control. And then there's the commerce clause, which says that if business is being done between the states, right, so Ohio to Kentucky or Ohio to California or anything like that, then the federal government can step in and regulate. So once the federal government regulates it, the states can't. And insulin would be one of those instances. Now, one of the big problems with what we're seeing with respect to insulin is that I don't believe enough of it is manufactured here in the United States. And I would consider that probably to be a national security issue, something that we should address at a federal level. You look at, we don't make a lot of steel here in the United States anymore. We don't make a lot of things here in the United States anymore. And so that's something that our federal leaders need to be aware of. And that is a conversation that I've been having, is how do we bring things back home and quit relying on, overseas countries to bring all that into us. Long and short, you've got a healthcare system that is essentially socialized. So 51% of the people, when I worked for the governor, 51% of the people in our state are either on Medicare or Medicaid. It's probably more now. The problem with that is that now you have one government entity dictating what prices will be. And so it makes it difficult for competition to happen here in America. And that's probably one of the reasons why you're seeing us import so much, is because it's just too expensive to make it here at home. And that's a problem.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Adam Brown. In your campaign, you said that you would limit government interference in our lives. What actions will you take, and how will you limit government interference in our lives?
Yeah, so one of the things, we have three branches of government. We have the executive branch, that's the governor. We have the judiciary branch, that's the court system. And we have the legislative branch, that's people like me on city council or state legislators or your federal congressman. I argue that we have a fourth branch of government, and I would call that the administrative state. So the administrative state, that's going to be places like EPA. You've heard of that. It's going to be like the USDA. So, those are federal ones, but we have state level administrative agencies. And they tend to just gobble up a lot of the resources. They're kind of like little monsters. They just keep growing and gaining power and pushing people out. So one of the things that I want to do down in Frankfurt is I want to work against the administrative state. I want to start to limit that. I want to start to cut that down, because in doing so, it's gonna have the unelected bureaucrats, the people that right. I'm up here on a stage. I'm seeking to be elected. You guys get to ask me tough questions. That's the way that it should work. The unelected bureaucrats don't have to go through that. So they're just somebody that's appointed to accomplish a specific goal, by a political actor. I don't think that's the best way. I think that state legislatures need to come in and they need to start passing the laws that they want and not ceding their power out to unelected people. So that's one of the things I want to do is work against the administrative state and make sure that when we pass laws as legislators, we know what we're passing. We're not just giving our authority to somebody else to do whatever they want with.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kaleb, and my question for you is, how will you protect students from violence and school shootings?
It's a tough question. You can't legislate away crazy. And a lot of the times when you look at these situations, these are crazy people. These are people with bad ideas who want to do bad things, and they're lost. I think that we need to look at how we can provide, specifically with Uvalde. When you look at that instance, there were a lot of failings of the system, of the way law enforcement responded to that. The doors weren't locked the way they should have been. So people just weren't following the basics of what they needed to do. And I think that falls to those local officials there to make sure that they're doing what they need to do with the resources that they've been provided. But I also see a trend in the individuals that do these things. They're lost young men. And that's one of the things that I've realized. I'm a family law attorney, so I deal with a lot of young men my age or younger, typically, who've lost their way in society to some respect. They don't understand what it means to be a father. They don't understand what it means to find a place in society. 40 years ago, we would say that there was the gender role for women was you're going to have kids and be a mom. And we've changed that, and for the better. Now we tell young ladies, you can go out, you can do whatever you want, you can succeed just the same way that the men can. And that's great, and that's right. But we haven't updated the narrative for young men. It's still be a provider. It's still get out there and rule the world, and that's not how it is anymore. The young ladies, your prefrontal cortex develops 2 years faster than young men, so you're more than likely to be better students than them, no offense guys, but the young ladies are just better at the system than us. And so, which is great. And sometimes young men get left behind. And when you look at some of the guys that did this, they're guys that have been left behind. So we need to find a way to make sure that young men aren't being left behind by the system, because they're the ones ultimately committing these acts for the most part, statistically. And that's something that I want to be focused on in Frankfurt. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Golji, and I'm wondering what inspired you to enter politics?
So, when I was in 6th grade, I had a fella, that wasn't a young man, but he was the sitting state senator. And he came and he spoke to our class, and it cued in my mind that I can make a difference. This guy who lives down the street, his daughter is friends with my sister. I know them, but he goes down and he makes laws and he makes changes, and he's just a guy. And that inspired me from the beginning to think, okay, how can I help my community? How can I make a difference? How can I make a change? So that was really the first time that I got into it. When I became an attorney, I started to realize that there's a system in play. And, the prosecutor's elected, the judge is elected. Here I am, the defense attorney, who's kind of looking around like all these people know each other, and how do I get to know them so that I can get, it's not preferential treatment, but how can I get just to know the system better, let them know who I am. And that's kind of when I first realized that if you want to be, you need to participate in society, in politics, in elections to get your voice heard and to make the politicians know, that you're here and that you want to be represented well. So that's why I got involved. That's how I got involved. And I think you all should do the same. I won my primary against the 16-year incumbent by 190 votes. That's literally one of you all going out and knocking doors a couple days over the course of a couple weeks, a couple Saturdays, that you can have an impact in an election. You can make the change. And that's ultimately why anybody should get involved, and that's why I would encourage all of you to get involved as well.
Thank you.
I'm Zoe Hernandez, and Northern Kentucky is currently doing well on the job front, but other parts of the state are not. Will efforts to help those parts of the state harm us here?
So, Northern Kentucky is doing well on the job front. And even in Northern Kentucky, a lot of the jobs that we're seeing coming in are logistics jobs, which are fine, which are great. What we need to be encouraging are manufacturing jobs, so high-tech manufacturing. Kentucky leads the nation in aerospace engineering. And when I worked for Governor Bevin, we would talk about that point a lot, and no one knew why and no one knew how. It just happened. Part of it had to do probably with our we're about a half day's drive from most of the eastern seaboard, so half the country. So probably part of it had to do with that, but it also goes to show you that government can only do so much in terms of job creation. Ultimately, there's a free market, and that free market is going to dictate, where they go, what they do, right? New York, they've got all the finance jobs because that's the finance hub. That's where Wall Street is. California has Silicon Valley. It's the tech hub. How did these things develop over time? It wasn't government that did it. It was private markets. It was people with a similar interest that just happened to coalesce in one area. So what we've got to do in Kentucky is create a competitive business climate that allows for people to come in and invest. Governor Bevin did a good job while he was in office. He offered tax incentives. He offered ways for companies to come in to increase, to invest. But in those other areas, it's difficult. So Eastern Kentucky is hard to get into. Have you ever driven to Eastern Kentucky before? Mm-hmm. It takes you about 4 hours. It takes you 4 hours to get anywhere. And then if you want to go from that one city, let's say you go to Pikeville and you want to go to Hazard, it probably takes you about another 4 hours just because there's so many hills and mountains and it's windy. So geographically, there's a problem with getting people in, getting people out. There's the populations there is less. In a lot of those counties, you'll see that the number one employer is the school district. It's just population density is not there. We probably need to look at investing more in our tourism here in the state. We've got a lot of beautiful countryside. How do we improve our state parks? How do we create kind of like a Gatlinburg in Kentucky? That'd be something great that we could do. Louisville is always going to be an economic juggernaut. Lexington's always going to be big. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have good business policy at Frankfort that allows for investment to come into the state, and that we're not crippling, and also having good administrative regulations. That's the administrative state I talked about earlier. Making sure that they're not doing too much to keep people from coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks. You're back.
I am. I do have one more question. So how will you help these smaller businesses like mom and pop shops without harming like bigger businesses in the process?
Yeah. So I'm a small business owner, right? I am a solo practitioner. It's just me in the office. So I don't get sick days. I don't get anything like that. So I'm the ultimate of small businesses. One of the things that makes it difficult for small businesses, they're called market barriers, so barriers to entry. So if you want to be a lawyer, right, like I am, you got to do a bunch of stuff. That's a market barrier. And it's not good or bad, it's a market barrier. You've got to go to school for a whole bunch of years. You got to go take a stupid bar exam that's the most difficult thing you've ever done in your life over the course of 2 days. And then you got to pay, yearly fees or yearly, bar dues to stay an attorney. And you've got to go to continuing education classes. Those are all market barriers. And you're going to have a lot of market barriers. So, why haven't we created a new oil refinery here in America in like the last, 20 years? It's been a long time. Don't quote me on that time. But there's a significant market barrier to get into that. There's a lot of regulatory, administrative paperwork that you have to get through, and then it just costs billions and billions of dollars to do it. So those are market barriers. So what we need to do is we need to lower market barriers for individuals. I'm not saying you're going to go open up an oil refinery tomorrow, but if you're going to start up a small business, let's say you want to start up a grocery store, something like that, there's a lot of USDA, there's a lot of regulations from the administrative side that you have to comply with. One perfect example, so I worked in food processing, right? I worked in agriculture. Food processing is part of that. If you want to open up a meat processing facility, you have to pay someone from the United States Department of Agriculture to sit in your office and monitor everybody at the cost of about $60,000 or $70,000 a year. That's a market barrier. Now, there is an act currently sitting in Congress, in the federal Congress, called the Prime Act. And what that would do is that would remove the barrier, right, that market barrier. You wouldn't have to have a USDA processor if the food is going to be sold within the state, so intrastate, not interstate, right? So if you have a Kentucky producer who's going to sell Kentucky beef to Kentucky people, that we could remove a market barrier there and allow small businesses to grow, but that's not going to have any impact on the big food processors who go outside of state, who are going all around, right? They're still going to have to meet those administrative regulations and burdens. So that's just one example. There's a number of other issues like that where you can lower or tamp down on some of the just licensing requirements, market barriers, make it easier for people to get in and to get a job, as opposed to, Amazon doesn't need our help, right? The big businesses, the massive corporations really don't need our help. It's the small businesses that do. And so we need to make a more competitive area for them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Alex Barco. Simple question, yes or no. Would you accept the results of the election?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, in the spirit of myself, this was awesome because how efficient was this? We're done in like 15 minutes. That's, I don't know, nothing says Mr. Dees like that. So do you have any final comments? Or?
Well, and if anybody else, if you guys have the time, I'm happy to take any other questions from the crowd or from, if anybody thought of something or has a follow-up.
Yeah, anybody? All right, what you got?
I'm Ian Smith, and I was wondering, what will you do to help reintegrate felons and help them have a stable source of income? Because the majority of homeless did once go to jail and could not get a sustainable job to hold.
Sure. So I am the president, I'm the board president for the Emergency Shelter of Northern Kentucky. It's the only low-barrier homeless shelter here in Northern Kentucky. And what we mean by low barrier is, look, we'll take anybody in. You could be, high on drugs, we'll take you in, as long as you're not causing a problem. We'll give you a place to stay for the night, turn you out in the morning, and let you go on your way. Now, as part of that, we have programs that help people find jobs, help people find housing. So those are parts of it. A lot of our employees there are second chance employees. So what we mean by second chance employees are they have some type of, maybe it's a felony, maybe it's a criminal record, maybe it's something like that. And so we help them find jobs, right? We help them get back in. Now, a few years back, we did pass a law that allows for nonviolent felons to expunge certain things off of their felony criminal record, right? Felony being a crime that carries a prison sentence or a jail sentence of more than a year, right, as distinguished from a misdemeanor, which is less than a year. But expanding that, I think, is a good idea. It's a good thing to make sure that people can get stuff expunged, so when background checks are run, it's not found. It's certainly going to increase it's good for our employers, right? It's going to increase the amount of people that are available to work for them. I was also in a program in 2017 called Leadership Kentucky. And in that program, we would go on, weekend visits around the state. So one weekend we went to Eddyville, which is the maximum security prison. They call it the Castle on the Lake. It's Kentucky's only maximum security prison. So these are the people that when we talk about felons getting back into society, these are the ones that are the furthest on the margin that probably need the most help, definitely need the most help. Now, what they had in that is they had programs where individuals could educate themselves. They had a water treatment plant in the facility. So the felons there could get in, they could educate themselves, they could learn this skill of water treatment, and then when they got out, there were jobs that they could go around the state and try to get into doing water treatment, right? Just kind of a niche industry. So we need to increase programs like that for people that are incarcerated. At the same weekend, we went to the Air Force Base. I can't think of the name. There's an Air Force base. And so what you've got there is you've got a bunch of guys that serve our country, that work in the military, that learn a specific skill over the course of 4 or 8 years, or however long their tour of duty is. And then when they get out, they don't really have skills that can transfer into other jobs, right? They're really good at being soldiers, but they're not so good at being, car salesmen. And so one of the things that they did there, and you're going to see a parallel between the people that did their lives right, quote unquote, and the people that did their lives wrong, quote unquote, is they both needed plans and they both needed help from those institutions that they were a part of to develop skills and to find ways to get back into society and to find jobs. And so ultimately that's what we need to do, is we need to be good partners with those institutions and try to find ways that we can get people back in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Connor. Going off what you said to Ian, what about kid felons? Like, I know all the shootings and they go to jail because of it. Like, what will you do for their education and that kind of stuff?
Yeah,
Because they don't know their way yet.
So my father was the principal for, we always called it the Northern Kentucky Day Treatment Center, but they changed that name over time. So it was kind of like, it was a juvenile justice facility. And that's where the bad kids would go, and he got all of them. And so there are programs like that exist, making sure that there are solid curriculums for those young men, those young women in those facilities, that they can, there's a point to be said about they're not bad people, they're not bad kids, they're just in bad situations and bad environments. And, no offense, your brain's not fully formed yet. I don't think that it really is fully formed until 26 or 30, right? And so you're always learning and you're always growing. And a lot of times these young kids are thrown into situations where the brain is just not able to comprehend all of what's going around. And so, we need to make sure that those facilities that we have are well staffed, that they're providing good curriculums for these children, and making sure that they can get counseling and help that they need.
Thank you.
Yep.
As you said before, you said Kentucky is the leading state in aerospace engineering. How would you bring more types and fields of engineering to Kentucky, and how could you support them?
So a lot of it has to do with tax policy, right? That would be my job as a state legislator, to make sure that we have good tax policy in place. But there's also working with local government and working with, your regional development agencies to make sure that all the good land or all the good place to put those facilities aren't being gobbled up. So, no offense to the transportation industry here in Kentucky or to the logistics industry, but the warehousing is all over the place. You can't go anywhere in northern Kentucky without seeing it, and we're happy to have those jobs. But part of it is making sure that we reserve certain areas, or that our local government has a plan as to how they're going to attract businesses in, and that the state and the local government are working hand in hand to make sure that we can bring that stuff in when it's time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, I am Aiden Washburn. How would you fix gun control without confiscating the weapons?
Yeah, so I believe that you have a constitutional right to bear arms, right? That's the Second Amendment of our Constitution. I'm not in favor of what are called red flag laws or anything like that. I think that if you meet the statutory requirements to own and have a gun, then you should be allowed to. So I don't know that I wouldn't increase any regulation, but I certainly would allow for individuals to obtain firearms if they needed it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So over the summer, Roe v. Wade was overturned, causing abortion to be illegal. And according to the First Amendment, freedom of religion is allowed. But it's against Jewish culture to save the child over the mother in abortion. So what will you do to help people who have Jewish culture or people who need to abort a baby?
So I want to understand the question. I guess the question is, would you allow an exception for life of the mother?
Or it's like rape or a pregnancy that was unplanned, that needs to be terminated from trauma or anything like that.
Sure. So I think that, I don't have so Kentucky's current law, as it sits now, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it, and there's a ballot amendment, so Amendment 2 that's on the ballot as well, and there's been a lot of misconceptions about it. So the current state of Kentucky law is that you are allowed abortions for life of the mother, right? There's that exception there. And so, I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a good law. I think that's pretty fair. Because obviously, right, logically, you're going to want to say, keep the life in being, right? Now, there's ballot amendment 2, or to the amendments to the Constitution 2, and all that does is that just says there's no constitutional right to an abortion, which means that now it's in the hands of the legislature to decide, as opposed to the hands of the judges, which is kind of how we got into the Roe v. Wade situation to begin with on substantive due process issues. I'm doing a lot of legalese, but that's how we got there. And so now what that amendment says is it says, look, we're going to put it in the hands of the legislature, make them decide. We're going to have a national and a statewide conversation about it. And then they've just said, no taxpayer-funded abortion as well, which I think is something that I would agree with, right? If you want to have it done, I don't think the taxpayer should be paying for it. So that's kind of the current state of play, and I don't have any problem with exceptions for life of the mother. I think that's moral.
All right, thank you.
So I had another question, and I was wondering what you're going to do about people that have been convicted for drug abuse and selling drugs and stuff like that.
Yeah. So Northern Kentucky was one of the first courts to open up drug court, right? And so if somebody's charged if they're an addict, right? There's a difference between someone that's an addict that has a mental health issue, as opposed to a drug dealer, right? Somebody that's just out, selling drugs for a profit. So I would increase the court system there. I think that's a public protection issue. I think that we need more drug courts. I think we need more mental health treatment. You see a lot of these, nobody wants to grow up to be a drug addict. Nobody says that. But they end up becoming one because there's some underlying mental health issue. And so I think we need to get back to focusing on that as opposed to just locking up everybody, for being an addict, as opposed to being a true hardened criminal.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So also on the topic of abortion, how exactly are you going to help those mothers who can't take care of a kid if they have to have one, or improve foster homes so a kid has a safe place to go?
Yep. So as a family law attorney, I don't do adoptions, but I do know that in the last couple of years we've worked in Kentucky, the legislature has, to expand adoptions and to make that easier. And I think that's certainly something that we need to do. Now, there are a lot of private entities, particularly, related to, I can't think of the name of them right now, but there's private entities that will help mothers that are going through that, find resources and get help. And so I think we need to work. I don't think government should give those groups money, but I think that we should work hand in hand with them to make sure that there are referrals, that people are getting, help and services that they need. And we need to make sure that, I do have some experience with our foster care homes, having done what are called DNA cases. So it's not genetic DNA, but it's dependency, neglect, and abuse cases. And those are where children are removed from the home and put in foster care sometime. That's not the preferred course that usually judges will rule on. They'll usually say, hey, look, let's see if there's a family member so we're not putting kids in the system. But we certainly need to look at that system, and we need to find ways that we can improve it and make sure that those children that are a part of it are getting access to services that they might need.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, me again. If you could change one thing about government, like take it away, what would that be? Like you mentioned some of this already.
Yeah. Part of it, I'd take the power that they have over you away. I think that, not all of it, right? Because I think there's some things the government needs to do, right? We need to have power in these areas. But I think I would work, and that's what I intend to do, is to work to increase your freedoms over the freedoms of a special interest or some lobbyist group that comes in and just wants to do something and doesn't give a rip how it affects you. That's my ultimate goal, is to make sure that it's a government for the people, not a government for rich corporations that have a bunch of money to lobby and to take you to fancy dinner and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do the follow-up on that one. Like you were talking about the bureaucratic groups that are just, I don't know, out of control. I don't know if you've ever read the political philosopher Hannah Arendt, but she said that bureaucracy is the biggest tyranny because they're totally unaccountable. What are some specific examples of like these bureaucratic groups that you think are?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I'll go back to, I worked for a bureaucracy, right? So we had a $40 million grant fund, and we had an $81 million revolving loan fund. And I'm not knocking my coworkers, but there's a system created where I could work unlimited time and I would accrue what are called comp hours. And so it's basically free vacation time that I could take. And I could hold on to that for as long as I wanted, and on the day that I retire, I could cash it all out. So I could cash out, $15,000, $20,000. And when it comes to our retirement system, right, that would bump up amount. It'd take 3 years average pay. It would bump it up. Probably talking over your head with all the numbers. But it would bump it up. And basically, I was able to game the system to make sure that I'm on the taxpayer dime for a whole lot longer. So that's kind of one thing that when you look at that bureaucratic state, is how do we keep people from gaming the system? But also, how do we make sure that specifically so if the government wants to regulate energy prices, what the government needs to do is the legislature needs to come in and say, this is exactly how we'll fix the energy crisis. Not say, here's a bunch of money for a group to go over there and fix it themselves. And so those are kind of the specific things that I'm talking about. The legislature needs to make those decisions, not leave it up to an administrative agency.
Right. And I'll test free speech and see who watches this, but put the Educational Professional Standards Board on your list. They're bad.
Sure. We'll look at them.
I said it. All right, go for it.
So you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. I'm just wondering, are there any controversies that you'd like to address with you or other candidates? Because the best place to hear that kind of information is from the people themselves instead of from social media throwing everything out of proportion.
Yeah. I don't know. I try not to be too controversial. Sometimes, just when you have people, we're all human, and no one's perfect. And, everybody has baggage, everybody's done something wrong. But that's not ultimately, I think, why I'm not running to, rag somebody or running through the ringer. But I think there's certain things about character that matter. And there's no specific controversy to address. But it's just that whenever, and know this, right, when you run, I'm a public official. So you guys can say whatever you want about me. You guys can literally lie about me, and you can put it in a newspaper and you can publish it. And I can't do anything about it because I'm a public official. I can't do that to you, right? You're a private citizen, an individual who's just a private individual. And so, defamation laws, those kinds of things apply there. So be aware that when, if you run for public office, my opponent's showing pictures of me with my collar popped from when I was a teenager. I'm 36 years old today. So be aware and know that too, that's not just a political thing, that's a life thing, right? Your employer is going to look through your social media, all that stuff is going to be available to you. And so, just be aware as you go through life that the little things you do today, or you're goofing off, at a Baptist campus event and you pop your collar, suddenly it ends up as an attack ad in your campaign. And so that's kind of the only thing I would say.
A follow-up question to that is, what is your plan to do things if you don't get elected in this position?
So if I didn't get elected, I'd continue to be an attorney. You can make changes through the government, and that's one avenue. And you can make changes with your life. If you're a successful businessman, you have a lot of influence. You can become a journalist, and you can report on stuff, and you can do that. So I'm an attorney. I already have a lot of power, quote unquote. I have the ability to make change in the community. If I see something that's unconstitutional, I can sue somebody over it, and I can try to fix that problem. So I'll always have that avenue, and it'll always be there for me. And in fact, if I win or if I lose, I'll still be a practicing attorney. This is a part-time position that I'm running for. So I'll still have all that and do all that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. No, I'll go as long as you all want, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that we need to increase our tourism in Kentucky. That's not going to damage the pretty forests and hills out there, is it?
Well, anytime that there is, construction, it might damage it, right? So we have the Daniel Boone National Forest. It's a federally protected forest where there are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to do development. We already have that exist great state parks. A lot of them haven't been updated in many, many years. I don't know if you've ever been to one, but they're not the best, and they could be. They could be really good. So there's a balance there that always has to be had when you talk about development versus preserving and keeping things the way that they are. So, but that natural beauty is itself the tourist attraction, and so we're not going to want to destroy that and tear it all down. And I'm not saying throw up Six Flags over there, but how can we use our natural beauty to attract people to it? And that's what I'd like to see more of.
Okay, thank you.
Start to wrap it up.
So addressing the issue on school shootings and protecting kids, what do you think about teachers owning weapons to protect themselves and other people?
I don't have a problem with it. You can't do it right now because I believe that all schools are gun-free zones, and so you would have to repeal that, and that would probably be some federal legislation to make sure that that happens. I always say, I'm pro Second Amendment. I think everybody has a right to access and to own a firearm, but that always comes with the caveat of you need to train yourself on how to use it. It's a dangerous weapon. So I don't think we should just be handing out guns willy-nilly to teachers. I think that they need to educate themselves on how to use it, how to properly do it. Having worked in law enforcement and having dealt on cases where officers have shot people, that it's very difficult to be accurate and precise in a heated moment. And so we need to make sure that if that's going to be the case, that there's training available, that they know how to use that, and it's just not, guns all over in the classroom. We need training.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One more, Owen.
So for Alyssa, you answered to her question that the students would need to find counseling and other sources of help. I'm assuming one of those sources would be therapy. But in the United States, there's not a lot of insurance or policies that actually support mental health. So how would you make it more acceptable and easier for people to get?
So, and I don't know there's difference between therapy and like a therapist and a psychologist, and I'm not sure on the exact legal terms. But part of it is just kind of like the insulin question earlier, right? We have a healthcare system that's essentially dictated by these one movers, or Medicare, Medicaid, and then the big insurance companies. So what we need to make sure that we're doing is that we're allowing individuals that want to get into those practices to get into it and to increase, have more of it. I don't know that there's a perfect solution to that issue, but I think that we certainly need to work at a state level to make sure that more people can get into that and that we can provide those services around the state.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I'll ask one final question, because I think it's one of the most important jobs in the state legislature is redistricting. Now, you'll have a few terms before you get there again, but what's your opinion of political gerrymandering? Does it violate one person, one vote, or?
Yeah, I don't understand. I mean, so I'm the 69th House district. I think I border like the 64th, and then I was looking at one of the Senate districts, and there's like a Senate district in the bottom of the state that's like 4, and then I think one's like way over on the other side. I'm not sure, but yeah, I don't know that it violates one person, one vote. But I do think that the way that some of the lines are drawn is kind of funny, and I've not had an experience in it, but so for one, right, you have our congressional district. One of them runs from Frankfort all the way down, and it's almost like a crescent shape to the western side of Kentucky. Why does it do that? I don't know. We've got Senate District 20. It runs from Kenton and Boone, the southern parts of Kenton and Boone County, all the way down to Frankfort. I mean, it's almost like a straight line. Why is it that way? Who knows? It's not helpful for anybody, I don't think. But I would like to see, just simple, this block, that block. Sometimes I'll be knocking doors and I'll have 2 houses on one street that are mine, that are my district, and the other 15 houses are somebody else's district. So it just, I don't know why we just don't follow the lines a little bit more, but it's always a strange thing.
Fair enough. Well, we thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully you come back again, talk to us. So, everybody,
Anytime.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Let's give him a...
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Do you have any final words, or you feel like you're...
Keep doing what you're doing, asking questions, be involved. Don't yell at your politicians, but ask them questions. And if they don't answer you and they won't talk to you and they run away from you, think about running against them. You can't just do it. You have to plan, you have to work hard, and you have to be the right person, and it's a tough thing. I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it, but it is something that needs to be done. That's what I tell you, stay engaged, don't fall asleep.
Great, thank you.